There's a poet whose work I got really interested in last year and explored some last year and have continued to explore this year. And I want to talk about her and her work a little bit in this video. So this poet is Sonia Sanchez. I've just finished reading her collection, Shake Loose My Skin, New and Selected Poems. This was published in 1999, so they're not exactly new anymore, which is kind of funny when you read volumes like this that are called New and Selected, and they were published like 30 years ago, so they're not really new anymore, but you know what it really means, of course. And so Sonia Sanchez, she was born in 1934. She's an African-American poet. She is well known to have been a prominent figure in what was known as the Black Arts Movement. This was kind of a literary and artistic movement that was really big in the 1960s and 70s, especially while the Civil Rights Movement was a big deal, that really celebrated Black pride and Black culture. So a lot of writers who took their cue from this movement produced works, especially literary works, that very much came out of Black cultural traditions, right, and celebrated Black pride. And other writers who were strongly associated with the Black Arts Movement were, I have a few written down, were Amiri Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones, Audre Lorde, whom I'm sure a lot of you know, Maya Angelou, who I'm certain a lot of people watching know of, and Nikki Giovanni would have been another one. And there are many more. Those are just the names that I found who seemed the most popular, who were involved in the Black Arts Movement. And Sonia Sanchez was also a prominent member of this movement. Well, member of this movement. It's not really a movement that there were members of. It wasn't like you carried a card as a member of it, but she was a prominent figure in it. And so to turn now to Sonia Sanchez's work, I discovered her poetry in a little bit of a weird way. I discovered it actually in a kind of unconventional book, a book I found at a thrift store and didn't really know anything about, but just grabbed it and started to read it right away and found it really interesting. It's this. This is Writing Poetry, the second edition by Barbara Drake. So it has a bit of a dull title, I know, but it does tell you basically what the book is. It's about how to write poetry. But unlike a lot of other texts that teach about writing poetry, rather than just going through and kind of describing different aspects of poetry like rhyme and alliteration and assonance and describing different forms of poetry like the sonnet and haiku and all these, it teaches you how to write poetry by presenting great examples of poems. And Barbara Drake kind of comments on every poem in it and will give you examples of poems that do particular things and then write about how they do them well, right, and why they do them well. And so it includes the poems and then commentary by Barbara Drake. And two of Sonia Sanchez's poems are in this collection. And I'll read them both to you and I can read them both to you relatively easily because they are both haiku. One thing that Sonia Sanchez wrote a lot of were haiku, or are haiku, I should say. She's still alive and writing, as far as I know. And so the two haiku that are included in this anthology really caught my attention. So I'll just read them both to you and offer just minimal comments on both of them. So here's the first one. So here it is. Never may my thirst for freedom be appeased by modern urinals. Okay? So that may seem odd, out of context, but this is actually a protest poem. It's a poem about bathroom segregation in the Jim Crow South. So that's what it's about. And it's just very interesting to me that Sonia Sanchez uses the haiku form to convey ideas that we usually don't associate with the haiku. When I think of haikus, I think of sort of spiritual poems, right? That you have this one central sort of spiritual image, right, that's supposed to really stick with you. And this does also rely on that one image, that one singular image, but it's not necessarily what you call spiritual, right? It's political. But it still really sticks out, I think. And then the second poem is more, I think, more of a love poem. So this is the second of those haiku. If I had known you, I would have left my love at home. So that one seems like more of a love poem. And one thing that I love in Sonia Sanchez's work is when she writes about love. When she writes about love and intimacy, I absolutely love it. That my favorite poems by her are about that. And I think my favorite poems by her, I have to say, are her haiku. Last year, I read a collection of hers that was just called Morning Haiku, and that was published in 2010. And I really wish that I had been making videos on this channel then, because I would have loved to talk about that collection, because I absolutely loved it. I need to buy myself a copy. I read it from the library, and there were so many haiku in there that I thought were just brilliantly beautiful. But the volume that I just read is not Morning Haiku. It is Shake Loose My Skin. And so Shake Loose My Skin is actually a bit earlier than Morning Haiku, again, published in 1999. And it has some of her haiku, and I'm going to read a couple of those, but it also has some longish poems, and some other poems that aren't super long, but that are longer than haiku are, which I realize is not that saying that much, because haiku are very, very short. But I want to read some of the poems to you, some of the highlights from this volume. And so I'm going to read, to start with, the very first poem that appears in this collection. It's called Homecoming, and I suspect that this poem was the title poem of Sonia Sanchez's very first collection that she ever published. The very first collection of poems that she ever published was called Homecoming, and this is a poem called Homecoming. So I assume that this was the title poem in that collection. And so I'm going to read the poem to you. I will say off the bat that this poem, as some of Sonia Sanchez's other poems do, does contain a certain word that I, as a white person, will not say aloud. I assume most of you will know what word I am referring to. Sonia Sanchez is a black woman, so she uses it as it is her right, but I will not say it as a white person. So when she uses that word, I will sort of insert a blank. Okay. So, but this is Homecoming, and I worry that its power might be dulled a little bit by my bleeping out of that one word, but I think its qualities should still come out. So here is Homecoming. I have been away so long. Once after college, I returned tourist style to watch all the blank killing themselves with 3-for-1ers, with needles that could not support their stutters. Now, woman, I have returned, leaving behind me all those hide-and-seek faces peeling with Freudian dreams. This is for real. Black, blank, my beauty, baby. I have learned it ain't like they say in the newspapers. So that I think does convey that ideas of black pride. I think what she's talking about is having kind of left home for a long time and perhaps gotten disconnected from her heritage as an African-American woman, and then having this homecoming where she comes home and realizes that she's gotten away from her heritage, from her origins, and needs to fix that, right? And something that comes out in this, something I really like about this. So those first two lines, I have been away so long. Away is actually two separate words. It's not the single word away, and they're separated by two lines by an enjambment. And so you've got, I have been a way. I have been a certain way for so long. But also she's been away. She's been away. She's been out. Right? So you have kind of that double meaning. And she really seems to be big on using kind of creative enjambments like that. So that's Homecoming. The second poem that I want to read for you is the second poem in this collection, so it's on the very next page. And this is called Poem at 30. So here's that. It is midnight, no magical bewitching hour for me. I know only that I am here waiting, remembering that once as a child I walked 2 miles in my sleep. Did I know then where I was going? Traveling. I'm always traveling. I want to tell you about me, about nights on a brown couch when I wrapped my bones in lint and refused to move. No one touches me anymore. Father, do not send me out among strangers. You black man, stretching, scraping the mold from your body. Here is my hand. I am not afraid of the night. So I thought that poem was very haunting and a little bit paradoxical. Something I do find in a lot of Sonia Sanchez's poems is that there's like this slight ambiguity as to what she's talking about, but that's what makes them so haunting. But at the same time, they're on the surface very simplistic, right? And this poem on the page looks very simple, but I think contains a lot of multitudes that don't necessarily come out immediately. So that's Poem at 30. Now I'm going to skip ahead a bit, just a little bit, to page 10 of this collection. This is a much shorter poem, and the 2 poems I've read so far haven't even been that long, but this is just poem number 3. So here's poem number 3. I gather up each sound you left behind and stretch them on our bed. Each night I breathe you and become high. So again, I really love Sonia Sanchez on love and eroticism, and I think that definitely contains that partly. And then the next poem I'm going to read is from later in the collection, from around the midpoint of the collection. This is just called Fragment 1. So here's Fragment 1. Alone, deranged by loitering, I hear the bricks pacing my window. My pores know how to come. What survives in me I still suspect. How still this savior. White suit and singing hand. Spitting mildew air. Who shapes the shade is. I am a reluctant ache, authenticating my bones. I shall spread out my veins and beat the dust into noise. I love those last 2 lines. I shall beat the dust into... I shall spread out my veins and beat the dust into noise. It seems like there's sort of an idea of rebirth or using destruction to create beauty. I'm not quite sure. Or using pain to create beauty. Right? So that was lovely. Now, a weakness about this collection for me, and this is why I kind of wish I could have talked about Morning Haiku, because I had way fewer reservations about that collection. A weakness of this collection for me is the presence of a lot of prose pieces in it. And I'm calling them prose pieces because I'm not quite sure what they're supposed to be. When I first saw them, I assumed they were going to be prose poems, but they didn't really read to me like prose poems. They read to me more like flash fiction or even straight on short stories. There's one in here that's like 10 pages long, and that seems like perhaps it's supposed to be a short story. And yet, even when they have kind of a narrative element, they don't read in the way that I expect prose fiction to read. They read very much as sort of philosophical fiction, right? Where the characters maybe aren't real characters, they're more stand-ins for ideas. And I associate that more with poetry than with even short fiction, even though I know it happens in fiction. And that just brought the collection down kind of for me, because those prose pieces, I had a couple of issues. So for one thing, I just found that they didn't have the same striking and haunting imagery, and the writing was just a bit more pedestrian in them. They were a bit more, I think, on the nose, a bit more blatant, it seemed, in the points that they were making, which doesn't usually work very well in poetic works for me. And Another thing is that for a prose poem to work for me, it needs to be like a paragraph or two at most. And like I said, some of the prose poems in here go on for pages. And they really brought me out of the collection sometimes. And prose poems in general for me are a tough sell. I feel like if you're gonna write poetry, then you need to commit to working in verse, working with the line, and not with blocks of prose. That's sort of my perspective. I'm not anti-prose poems, but I do have reservations about them. So those did bring this collection down, unfortunately a fair amount, but there are a couple of the prose pieces that I did like. There was one in here called Graduation Notes, which was, I got the sense was her tribute to some kids graduating from high school, and it was rather lovely. But the one that I want to read a little bit to you from is called A Remembrance. And this piece is, I get the sense, kind of her obituary for James Baldwin. It's a beautiful tribute to James Baldwin. And I want to read you the first 3 paragraphs, not the whole thing, because it goes on for 5 pages. But I want to read you the first few paragraphs, because it's a really beautiful tribute to James Baldwin. And if you love James Baldwin, I suspect you will really like this. So this is the opening of A Remembrance. The news of his death reached me in Trinidad around midnight. I was lecturing in the country about African American literature and liberation, longevity and love, commitment and courage. I could not sleep. I got up and walked out of my hotel room into a night filled with stars. And I sat down in the park and talked to him about the world, about his work, how grateful we all are that he walked on the earth, that he breathed, that he preached, that he came toward us, baptizing us with his holy words. And some of us were saved because of him. Harlem man, genius, piercing us with his eyes and pen. How to write of this beautiful, big-eyed man who took on the country with his words. How to make anyone understand his beauty in a country that hates blacks. How to explain his unpublished urgency. I guess I'll say that James Arthur Baldwin came out of Harlem sweating blood, counting kernel by kernel the years spent in storefront churches. I guess I'll say he walked his young steps like my grandfather, counting fatigue at the end of each day. Starved with pain, he left, came back. He questioned and answered in gold. He wept in disbelief at himself and his country, and pardoned us all. So that's from A Remembrance about James Baldwin. So I don't want to totally dismiss the prose pieces in here because there's some good stuff in them, but they did bring the collection down for me. And I also found that as the collection continued, I didn't find the poems in the second half quite as powerful as the poems in the first half. I found some of them very overtly political, and that makes sense given Sonia Sanchez's background in the Black Arts movement, and so on and so forth. And political poetry is really tough to do in a way that's universal and that really has lasting literary power. And a lot of those latter poems are heavily political, and that might be why they didn't quite strike home for me. But I do want this video to be a recommend for Sonia Sanchez. I don't want to be too down on her work. And so I want to end by reading 2 more of her haiku. Because her haiku, I think, are her best work that I've read so far. So here are 2 more haiku. The first one is just called Haiku 1, and the second one is called Haiku 9. So here is Haiku 1. I have died and dreamed myself back to your arms, where what I died for sleeps. So that's Haiku 1. And then finally, Haiku 9. The sprawling sound of my death sails on the wind, a white butterfly. And that last one is unconventional by Sonia Sanchez's standards, but more of a conventional haiku by the standards of what we usually expect from haiku, right? That one bold image that kind of sticks with you and makes you think, right, or feel. So anyway, that's Sonia Sanchez. I do recommend her work despite my reservations about this collection. Definitely seek out Morning Haiku. There is one more collection of her poetry that's sort of a selected poems by her that is more recent that I would like to get my hands on and read. So I may make a video about that when I read it. But anyway, those of you who have read Sonia Sanchez, please let me know what you think of her. Let me know your favorite poem by her. And anyway, but without further drawing this video out, I will leave it at that and talk to you all soon.